You're listening to the Coach's Journey podcast, exposing the struggles and celebrating the successes in the life of coaches who are action takers and creating authentic impact in today's world. Whether you're just starting out, expanding your reach, or exploding your impact, you're in the right place right now. Stay tuned and be sure to subscribe to this podcast. Now, here are your hosts of the Coach's Journey podcast.
What's up, Coaches Nation? This is the Coaching Journey podcast. Once again, we are here with amazing Faisal Insan and Dr. Sherry Fluellen. We're excited to bring you another podcast episode. Today is going to be awesome. And part of that is because we are going to hit a really hot topic that you see all over the news, all over the headlines. But even if you're watching and listening to this podcast in like a year or 2 or 10 from now, it's still going to be highly relevant because we are going to talk about how to work with clients, how to respond in a climate where emotions and fear are running really high. And so if you haven't guessed at kind of what we're going to dive into, specifically, how do we as coaches and how is the coaching community, how can we respond to the current economic and banking crisis? Just to give some context, if you're watching this a little bit later on, the Feds have, over the last year or so, year and a half, have continued to increase interest rates, or the effect of what they're doing is increasing interest rates. And so they're trying to decrease or slow down inflation. All of this stuff is causing a lot of challenges for the average person, but also for, a lot of executives and leaders. It's just, there's a lot of uncertainty going on about what's going to happen with one's job, what's going to happen in the marketplace, what's going to happen with, bank accounts and investments, because there's been a lot of fluctuation in that as well. Just about a week ago, a couple banks have quote unquote collapsed and are being assumed by other banks. And so that is just stirring the pot even more. So chances are you're working with clients, or maybe you yourself are starting to feel a bit panicked, a bit fearful. You're not really sure what to do. So that's what we're going to talk about today. How do we work in that kind of climate as coaches, and how do we work with our clients when they're emotionally raw and fearful and concerned and all of those sorts of things? It might even impact, or you might think it impacts, the decision for clients to sign up with you because they're concerned about their finances and what the future holds. So this really is very multifaceted. And so we kind of want to see where this conversation goes, what Faisal's thoughts are, what my thoughts are. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Now, obviously, in this moment, we can't hear them, but you can put them down below. If you're watching us on our Facebook group or wherever you might be seeing this, you can comment or send us a message. We'd love to hear from you. So I'll take a deep breath, Faisal. Have you been working with some of the clients that you're working with? Has the economic challenges that have just kind of been ramped up even more recently, have they come to the surface as an issue, or how are you seeing them?
Before I go on my long-winded journey, first of all, yes, it definitely has affected people, whether it's potential clients or those who I'm already working with. But I am actually curious, before I jump in, I'm actually really curious to hear your take on it from a real estate investor perspective, because I think that will clarify some of the things I'm going to go into, because a lot of my clients are real estate investors. If you step away from the coach, and I know you're connected with investors and the realtors and people who are in the real estate world, how is this affecting? Because I know there's a big effect in that area.
So great question. I think everybody that's in the real estate space kind of has a different concern or different fear, a different way of responding, and I think a different way that they need to think about things. So as an investor, if I'm working on buying stuff, which I'm always kind of actively looking, my concerns and what I focus on, I think would be very different than somebody that's already bought in, because I know that there are a lot of investors who have purchased properties over the past few years on adjustable rate loans, ones that adjust. That is honestly where I see the biggest amount of justified fear residing in the real estate industry, because just to kind of break it down quickly, you buy a property, it's cash flowing, but what happens then is your rate can adjust if you have that kind of mortgage. And then all of a sudden, the expenses and the income stay the same with the exception of your amount of interest. And so that some of the increases that people could experience from that alone could kick it out of being cash flowing. And then if you have a bigger property and then you've got other investors involved, now you have a cluster because you might be losing money, and not only losing your own money, but losing other people's money. So there's a real significant concern in that space of the decisions that have already been made. And now kind of these unexpected changes impact versus somebody that hasn't bought and they're wanting to wait and see, or they're like, well, it's a big interest rate, just because they're used to what the interest rate used to be. So my long-winded answer is it really depends on where you are in the real estate cycle of life.
Yeah, I love how logically you looked at that whole process. That is not the sense that I get when I'm talking to investors.
Yeah.
Because it, like what you described, it was very like my concern, like the concern was very logical and rational in the sense that, hey, if these things go down, then that's going to affect people, and I would be concerned about it. And that's a legitimate concern because
Yes.
actually, and just to break this down for everybody, if you haven't thought about this, this actually affects other people who are, for example, who have mortgages as well. So we're not just talking about the real estate investing space. We're like people who have mortgages at variable rates, and you called it, what did you call it?
Adjustable or variable.
Adjustable variable. And not only them, but people who have been on a fixed rate and they're up for renewal soon. And there's a prediction that they're talking about, at least in Canada, that's where a lot of foreclosure of people selling their houses. I mean, that's creating a challenge. And also on the other side of it, jobs are a big problem. So I was sharing that with Sherry. I talked to a potential client the other day who works at one of the big companies. I won't reveal it because it will make it obvious. But a big computer company, and they have been laying off people since last year, like at mass, like 13,000 people last year. And now they went through another wave of it. Partly there's adjustment to technology that's coming around, but a huge part of it, the companies are concerned too. They don't know if they're going to be able to pay their bills and still gain profit out of it. So I want to kind of get coaches to understand, because so it affects people in day-to-day life. So it doesn't even matter if you own a business or not. Like, and on top of that, the commodity costs are like skyrocketing pretty much everywhere.
Yes.
And so like little things are adding up, and that something has to give. In reality, something has to give. And when people start to see news such as a big bank, like the Silicon Valley Bank going out of business, that freaks people out. And when I paid attention to it, because some of my investor clients, they started posting on LinkedIn and everywhere, I'm like, holy shoot. And you could tell they're freaking out. And then when you look at the conversations, when you talk to them about it, they are freaking out. And I also know a couple of people who had actually money in a couple of these banks, so that actually affect people negatively too. So looking at all this, so as soon as you bring this stuff into the picture, and that's why I asked you, like, what's the real estate take? And every time this has happened, and this is not the only time that has happened. So for example, when the pandemic came into the picture, it was this very similar reaction to the pandemic. And it was because real estate investors at the time, for example, they were like, oh, shoot, what if my tenants are not paying rent? Because there was a huge thing around the rents. And they didn't know if they could pay their investors. They didn't even know if it could sustain it. So a lot of the clients who came to me, it wasn't like a logical problem. They emotionally couldn't deal with it. They didn't know how to handle it from an emotional point of view. They weren't even going to the rational side of it yet. I'm sure they had conversations. They were dealing with their team, but in their own space, they were freaking out. So a lot of their thought space and emotional state was in panic. And they couldn't focus. They didn't know what was going to happen. As soon as we would go into conversations, an interesting thing would come out. As soon as you deal with the emotional side of it, then the rational side starts to emerge. And then they can create a plan around it. And then they can think through what their options are and what are the possible outcomes, which in most cases, a lot of these guys have backups. A lot of these guys have due diligence systems. So some will be affected negatively, but a lot of these guys have a lot of options, but they don't even get to that until they can actually deal with the emotion side. The bad news for them, the good news for coaches, most people don't know how to deal with the emotional side. And that's where, to me, I would say pandemic was a huge hike for my business, for coaching. And when I saw that, I could already tell people are booking more calls with me without me even trying to promote too much. And it's the same similar thing happened at that time. Now, of course, it depends on the demographic that you're focusing on, but it matters that we understand that. And you might think about, well, what are your options? How are you going towards that a lot? But they might not even know how to go towards that. And you might be overriding just like they're overriding. And they don't have the tools, the awareness to dig a little bit deeper and look at the bigger picture and look at how they can mitigate a lot of the challenges and risks and all that stuff as they're moving through it. But before I kind of move forward, what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think you bring up a really good point that when you think about our brain and how it works, there's the logic centers and then there's the emotional centers. When the emotional centers are triggered, it's like a blizzard or a sandstorm. It's like everything is still there and in place, but the wind is blowing and stuff is going so you can't see it. Or maybe it's like being in a cave, a true cave where there is zero light. Like your hand is right here, but you can't see it because you're so enveloped in your own emotional turmoil and kind of storm. So that has to get dealt with in some way. There has to be some way to kind of figure that out in order for the logic to kind of set in. I think people are usually pretty good, and I am usually pretty good at being logical in some of these situations, but only after the emotional part has been recognized and has been, given space and time to express itself. And then it's like, okay, now I can kind of have a little bit more of a clear head. Like the snowstorm is starting to pass and I can start to see things a half a mile away.
And also it's funny because the entrepreneurs that I've worked with, even though they might not have formal training in dealing with their emotions, or sometimes they haven't gone through a formal coaching process, a lot of these guys have learned because they've dealt with a lot of crazy situations. They've dealt with a lot of these and they go through the turmoil, they go through all the stuff. And then at some point after they freak out, they'll be like, okay, we need to change something. And those entrepreneurs tend to be very good at what they do because they pivot quickly. Like they will still go through the panic and craziness, just like everybody else, but their recovery is much faster. Yes. And for coaches who are listening to this, if you're not up to date on the way Dr. Sherry described it, they're like, these are the two conflicting parts of our brain, like the hindbrain, the limbic system, and the prefrontal cortex. Sometimes they go in conflict, and there are reasons behind it. Like if there's an animal coming towards you, you're not going to sit there, assess your possibilities. Your body's going to be like, get the fish out of the way, or find a way to fight this animal. If you're a family member, somebody's in danger, you're not going to think and assess options. There are no logic. Like I wouldn't even care if for example, if I'm crossing the road and my daughter goes in front of me and there's a car coming, I don't think I would be concerned for even hurting her because I want her to be alive first. And that's very automatic process. And I'm not assessing options. Like this happens very automatically. So a lot of people go into that fight, freeze, flight response, and it's consistent. It's not like usually that response is a very temporary response until the danger subsides. The problem is that the danger is not physical in nature. It's not in front of you. It gets amplified in our mind, especially if you're surrounded by other people who are scared as well. And now it's being reinforced socially for you. And a lot of the market conditions so I've been listening to a lot of the lectures around what happens in downturns of economy. It's a mass panic. It becomes, even the Silicon Valley Bank, the way they talk about it is that one person found out and recognized something, sent an email, and everybody panicked. They wanted to pull me out, and they went out of business.
It was a self-fulfilling prophecy. Like it wouldn't have happened if the panic hadn't been there. One of the goals I think about, or one of the realities is, if myself or a client continues to kind of fester in this environment of anxiety where they're constantly being fed that anxiety, fear, it might actually make the situation worse rather than just feeling bad. It might literally increase the severity of what ends up happening. And so I think that helping somebody work through that and move into their resiliency as a human and more into that logical aspect where they can take action, concerted, specific, intentional action based on the future, based on the present and the future. I think that shift is really, really important.
Yeah, definitely. It's one of those things that we might completely omit, especially if you've worked on this and your normal is that you can recover from this quickly. If that's your norm, you might not even think to get into that because your norm that's not a big deal. It is a concern. It's not a big deal, but your client might not be going through that. Like, for example, throughout the pandemic, worry became a huge issue. Like it started becoming more of like a recurring thing, more so than normal, because everybody was worrying, and it became more reinforced. So, for example, in these situations, I would want to check in with my clients. Even if the topic is completely off, I would bring them back. I'll be like, okay, I know there are a lot of things happening, and what are your thoughts? And a lot of times they will bring it up. They'll be like, hey, I heard about the news, this and that. I've been thinking about this stuff. They will bring it up. But if they don't bring it up, I would want to bring this up, because these are like global level events. It affects everybody, just like pandemic affected a lot of people. So throughout the pandemic, I think I had much more conversations about family life than any other time in my coaching, because people were directly dealing with, like, they were more around their family, even though they were far away from other households, but within their household, they were having conflicts with their other family members outside. They didn't know how to navigate that. So it became a very dominant topic. As the pandemic kind of subsided and as they started connecting with each other, that became less of an issue.
Yeah.
So it makes a huge difference. And I want to go into it in a couple of different directions. One is, what do you do with your recurring clients? But also, how do you approach clients you're just meeting with? Because your assumption as a coach might be that, oh, a lot of clients will not want to work with me because there's a challenge with the economy. Now, that might be one of the assumptions, but that might not completely be off, because what you have to understand is kind of put yourself out of the situation. Let's say you're having money conflicts, money challenges, or those kind of things. Other people are likely not having that. They might have a lot of savings and investments and stuff. They're much more freaked out about losing the money when they sign up or invest in your program. Because if they see the value of you helping them deal with the panic and the craziness and all this stuff, and get them clear about their goals and how they're going to deal with this stuff, you have clients, and you have a lot of clients, because a lot of people are going to be panicked who have the resources to invest in something like this. And in fact, from a high performance standpoint, like if you look at the research one, and this is the thing that we talked about in our masterclass on Monday too, is that your clients don't necessarily just need value in a session. If you're doing a discovery call, they need to have this necessity to sign up. You just got a global level necessity handed to you.
Right, on a silver platter. I think you bring up a really critical point, and that sometimes it is easy for us as coaches to take what our concerns are, our life circumstances, and make assumptions that, oh, well, because I'm experiencing some financial challenges because of this, or fear, then my client is too, and they may have the same or make some of the same decisions that and that's an easy thing for us to do. That's what we do as humans. Like, I think, short of being intentional not to do this, we assume everybody is like us in some way, oh, they think like us, oh, they like the same thing, that's just egocentric. Like, that's just part of how we are. That's from the psychology world. That's just how we are. We're like that as kids. That's part of our nature, is being egocentric. And so it's hard, or it's intentional for us to shift out of that, to recognize that not everybody is like us. And so don't make those assumptions, I think, is ultimately that point. And I think that's a great.
I love that point you brought up, and this is why actually empathy is so difficult, because like a lot of times we might need to be empathetic towards somebody who haven't gone through that experience, and they will need that. And as coaches, I would say that's probably one of the most important traits you will need to have, is that people are going to share a lot of things with you. Yes. And you might even think at thought level that that's ridiculous, but to step back and separate your thought from their experience and look at their emotions in the moment and their body language, that they're hurting because of that, and they're struggling because of that. And you might be perfectly fine. Put the judgment aside to see them. That is a difficult thing to do within a session. So that is a powerful quality to develop as a coach, is to separate yourself in that session from, because your focus is the client and what they need and what they're struggling with, and their experience. As much as you might assume that it will be like you, it might not. It might be completely different. That's why, for example, pain is one of those things that's relative to somebody's experience, like even physical pain. Like, yes, one person could get hit by something and they will describe their pain in a very different way than another person. Depends on their past experience, their resiliency, their tolerance for pain, how the meaning that they assign to pain, so many factors.
Now, so fascinating.
So add to that, now emotional pain is even more vague than physical pain. Like, at least physical pain, you can see it, right? You can, if somebody gets hurt, on the other hand, you can empathize with that. That's a lot of times emotional pain we can't assess very well. And this is where I think if coaches kind of show up and they can be empathetic to the other person's situation, even though they're not going through any of that, and they might even have all sorts of thoughts that might be not look at that as a positive or negative situation. But if you can do that, you have clients that will come to you, because people need that a lot of times. Because most of these guys, especially if you're working with somebody who is successful in their professional life, who has businesses, most of you guys don't feel like they're understood. They feel like they're alone anyway.
Yes.
And if they can find somebody who can understand them at the first level, of course, there's a challenge and depth and other things that come into coaching, but that's the first level of it, is that if you can bring that in a session. And also, this is also in terms of how you talk to your clients in the marketing end too, is if you can understand their pain and their struggles, if you can communicate that with them, they will come to you. They will want to talk to somebody, because most of these guys don't have a lot of people to talk to. And if they do, they might not feel like they could be vulnerable enough, and they might not feel like they're supported enough in that journey. I don't want this to come off as a way that, oh, we're taking advantage of people's pain. That's not what I'm saying. What I want this to come off in the sense that there are people actually in pain, and you might be one of the best hope they have for how they need to work through this. And we're not just talking about like, okay, they're going to go out of business. We're talking about like family situations, like somebody's business falls apart, somebody loses a job, they don't know how to deal with it, or somebody they're so stressed out that they don't know how to deal with each other, with their kids, and that stress is showing up in their life. The impact of it is real, and you might be that next hope they have. And this comes down to, are you actually talking to people? Because if you're not, they have no idea how to find you.
Right. So using what you just said about, like, if you break your arm, think about it in that capacity. So if you, or let's use cancer, because the cancer is less of an acute thing than breaking an arm. Let's say that you just found out you had cancer, and your options are, you can hunt and search all day and talk to people and try to find that oncologist that could potentially help you, but they're not advertising. They're kind of hidden. So you're having to dig and, like, surely there's a cancer doctor, an oncologist out there that can help me. So there's that. Or you could be driving and see a billboard that says, got cancer? We have a team to help you. We will make it as painless, as comfortable. We'll be there to beat and fight this thing with you. Like, would you rather have to hunt and find them? Or would you rather somebody be like, no, these are all your pain points and the pain you're going to go through. We got you. So that's the difference. If you're not advertising, if you're not marketing about this stuff, you're like the doctor, the oncologist that's not advertising. He didn't create the cancer. He's not creating your pain or your journey, but he sure can impact the journey in a positive way by helping people through this. So I hope that kind of physical example helps you recognize the kind of absurdity that we can think of, like, oh, maybe I shouldn't say anything, or maybe I shouldn't talk about that thing. You're not creating the pain. You're just highlighting that you can help.
Yeah. And also, it's actually worse with coaching. Like, I love that example. So imagine people are going through that and they don't know what a doctor is.
They don't know that there's actually help.
There's actually help. So right now I'm doing this series on my podcast for my YouTube channel, where I'm interviewing my clients, and I've already done about 5 of those. They're slowly coming out, and I just listened to the first one that came out after the edits and everything. And none of them knew coaching. It's like, no, they didn't understand coaching. They didn't know it was a thing. It was, and when I asked them, like, how did you? Well, I was exposed to you in this book club. You were speaking at this thing, or I saw you in this meetup, or something like that. Like, they were exposed to what I was doing to some degree, and they became curious. They didn't even know what the hell coaching was. Yeah. And even if they didn't think this was coaching. And then when they go through it, like, holy shoot, this is amazing. I didn't know what this was. And even just when they're trying to describe their experience, it's been actually interesting and challenging to get them to describe their experience of coaching, because it's very hard to do that, get them to, and they keep saying it over and over, like, it's very hard to describe like what I went through in there. Like, that's why coaching is such an experiential thing, is that they can only tell you like what effect it has had, and they might not even connect many of the things. So as I've had these conversations with my clients, I've had to kind of jog their memory. Like, remember we had this conversation around this thing and you were going through this. Like, oh yeah, I completely forgot about that. And now they're an amazing parent, but they completely forgot that was related to multiple conversations that we had.
Yeah, that's so good. And there have been plenty of times in my own life where I didn't realize something was an issue or bothering me until it was gone. And which of course applied to coaching makes it a bit of a challenge. Then the question becomes, how can I help people understand that the pain they're experiencing, that they don't even realize they're experiencing because they don't know that there's another way? How can I help them have that perspective that there is another way? Which ties very much into the fear and anxiety right now. I'll bet there's a lot of people that are like, well, it is what it is. I'm just going to sit here in fear and feel paralyzed because I have no other option than to put my money in a bank. And now the banks aren't safe. At least that's what they feel. And so they just sit with that because they don't think there's another way, but there is another way. There's another way logically, but there's also another way to experience what's happening. They don't have to be so fearful, or they can experience it in a way that they can work through it rather than, kind of getting more entrenched in it. So these are ways that we can highlight what they're experiencing and then help them recognize that there is another way if they're open.
Yeah, I love that and completely agree. It's our underlying assumption when we're talking about this. And this is where you come in as a coach, that our underlying assumption is you know how to deal with your emotions, or you're at least working through it or trying to work through it. You don't need to be perfect at it, but if you don't know how to work through it, it'll be very difficult for you to jump in with a client. I've seen this in action where I've observed a session where there was a moment where this coach was going into it. And for me, it's like watching a movie, to be honest. It's more interesting than a movie.
Popcorn too. Do you like eat popcorn?
I'm like listening to this and I'm waiting for this coach to ask this very obvious, direct question. And when this person is sharing about their relationship, the coach completely derails the conversation, goes in a different direction. I'm like, let's go there. It was so direct. And I actually went back and I didn't want to assume something, even though I was like boiling up. So I go, conversation. So I literally played that part. I'm like, so why didn't you go into this person's relationship when she was hurting in that moment? And this was his literal verbatim was that I didn't feel comfortable going into it.
Yeah, I was guessing you were going to say that person was like, I had no idea what to do with it, so I'm just going to go a different direction.
The same exact thing. He
Yeah.
was uncomfortable dealing with it. If you're uncomfortable with your own emotions, you're not going to be able to be comfortable to ask those direct questions, which would be a very simple question. It won't be like a complicated or profound question. It's like, hey, it looks like you're hurting there. I wouldn't even label it. Like, it looks like you're hurting there, at least to me. I see a lot of emotions there. What's going on there? He completely bypassed and went towards a different direction. And I could tell the client was confused too, but she didn't know what to say because she's not the coach.
Yeah. Yeah. So in a parallel universe, as in therapy, one of the most fearful questions that a lot of times, especially newer therapists don't ask is, so are you thinking about hurting yourself? Like, it's like they're introducing the idea to somebody. There's this weird thought and perspective that if I ask
They're
somebody,
going to influence them.
Yeah, are you going to kill yourself? That all of a sudden, ooh, that's actually a really good idea.
Good idea. Let me put it on my list.
We're asking questions and we're trying to help people, it's helpful for us, I think. So this is an interesting thing that I heard you say years ago, Faisal, that has stuck with me. It's this interesting thing or balance, because I think what you said, and you're probably like, what did I say? You said something.
I don't know.
You said something to the effect of, I don't really have to know or understand what's going on with the client to still help them through it. That was like a mind blow for me, quite frankly, because up to that point, I felt like the only way I could help was if I fully understood. And so a lot of times I would end up spending a lot of time asking questions, trying to clarify, trying to understand the family constellation and who's all involved and stuff like that, which I think some of that's important. But so there's this dichotomy of like, how much do I go into detail on some of these questions versus how much don't I? But around emotions, I think if we if we don't help somebody kind of express and uncover what's there, it's left a mystery that is still highly impacting them. And just asking some of these questions, even though they might scare you. And as a coach, you're probably going to be in the position at times to ask that question. Like, are things so bad? Are you feeling so in despair that you're considering killing yourself? You're probably going to have to ask that at some point, or be in the position of making that choice of like, do I or don't I? But we're not introducing more fear. We're just allowing what is to come up. And I love the idea, or the question that we can ask ourselves is, are we uncomfortable with it? Because even if you're uncomfortable with it, you can still do it. You can still ask these questions and hang with them in the moment, in your discomfort and maybe their discomfort. But there's a lot of healing that can happen in that moment, even if you're uncomfortable. Like your comfort level really is irrelevant, in my opinion.
Well, I would say it's irrelevant, but also very relevant in the sense that I would go as far as, so here, like I'll give you a frame of reference. The coaching sessions that go very well for me, and like out of hundreds of coaching sessions that are like, my mind was blown up, and then the other person, and we're like at the end wondering like, what the hell? How did this come out of this conversation? I was just as uncomfortable as the client was. Yeah. And literally, and I know that when those moments happen, like I know that before I ask the question, my heart rate goes up. So my body responds to it faster than my thoughts even catch up. So I'm like, oh shit, I gotta ask the client, what do I need to, and I'm like, my thoughts are catching up. And that's part of the reason why Steve Chandler in his book, The Prosperous Coach, he says, and it took me a while to figure out what he meant by that. Like part of your attention always needs to be on your body. And we know that from like how body language works. Your body doesn't know how to lie. Your mind does. Your mind will tell you all kinds of things, all kinds of narratives and stories, and your clients' minds will do too. But your body will tell you the truth. If you are, and it sounds counterintuitive, he's like, well, shouldn't my attention be fully on my client? No. You need to be aware of yourself too in that moment. Yeah. So usually what ends up happening is in those moments when I need to ask a question, like subconsciously, I know what I need to do. And there's another expert on this who studies the neuroscience aspect of it. And he's like, your body is your subconscious mind. Your body will give you very quick responses compared to your thoughts by the time they catch up. And in my experience, it's very true. So I'm sitting there and I'm asking a bunch of questions that are going at it. And all of a sudden I notice a shift in physiology, a tonality difference, and it happens it's like split second. And one of the first things I notice before I ask a difficult question is my heart rate starts to shoot up. And then I become aware, I'm like, oh shit. It's like I'm sitting there and all of a sudden they hear a bird and their ears start to go like this, like their eyes. That's what happens.
So I can totally imagine I'm sitting here having a session, and then all of a sudden with you, Faisal, and all of a sudden I hear this beep, beep, beep. What is that? Don't worry about it. It's just my heart rate monitor. It's telling me I need to really ask.
I know, somebody has a whole monitor.
It's like my Apple Watch is going off because it detected a heart rate increase.
So that'd be interesting to see.
That would be fascinating.
Actually, I realized this, like when I was working through this a couple of years ago, Tony Robbins came up with I'm Not Your Guru, the documentary he put on Netflix. I really loved it. Like how, like, I just loved the coaching parts of it. And when he was going in the audience and just the stories that people shared at the end, part of the interview was the guy who was creating the documentary. He's like, yes, Tony Robbins, like, aren't you concerned that you're going to tell somebody something that they're going to do and they're going to screw up something in their life and you would be held accountable or something like that? He actually gave a really profound answer from a coaching standpoint. I don't think most people picked up on that. He's like, if you pay really close attention, I'm actually not telling anybody what to do. Mm-hmm. He's actually pulling something out of them and he's checking in with them. Is that what you need to do? He's like, well, what's stopping you then? And it looks like at the end that he's telling them to do this thing, but they had already made the decisions quite a few seconds or a few minutes before then. He can tell that they've made the decision. They just can't move their body, and he just kind of gives them a nudge. And that is very powerful to kind of think from a coach's standpoint, because a lot of the times we get into these coaching sessions, like the different, because a lot of times coaches are thinking about like, what profound question that I can ask that will move people. I don't think there are any standard profound questions, because it depends how it lands. It depends what state the client is in. It depends on the context of the conversation, because you could ask that question will have the completely different effect at different times. But in that moment, if you're present enough with the client, if you notice the simple shifts, and I'll give an example the other day. So I was with a client. He's a relatively new client. I felt like he was going to leave the program as well. And he had done a couple of sessions. And the way he was describing it, because he was realizing he was creating narratives in his mind. He's like, every time I come into these calls, like, I feel like I'm making up stuff. It's like, I don't actually have any problems in my life. He literally put it this way. I don't actually. And so his perception was, and I could tell, that coaching is about fixing things. And partly because he had been in a lot of the group sessions so far and he had only done one-on-one. And then I realized that he was looking for another level because it wasn't about a challenge. And by the way, for coaches, this is important because we've had coaches in our community who will go in a coaching session and they would ask the coach, because they don't have like a specific process they're talking to me, like, what are you dealing with right now? Or what are you struggling with? And the coach will literally say, I'm not struggling with anything. And they don't know how to navigate that. So this was actually a very difficult session for me to navigate in the beginning, the first 10 minutes of it, because I was trying to understand what this client was going through. And his perception, I could tell, I would pick up, is that he thinks it's about fixing things. And for me, it's not that. It's actually about pushing them to create a bigger perspective in life, going deeper into their own potential, creating a bigger vision for what matters to them. And has nothing to do with fixing anything. And the fixing actually is a byproduct of that. Because Grant Cardone says this a lot, is like, when you 10x your stuff, you're not going to be worried about little problems in your life. You're going to deal with bigger problems. Yeah. Not quite like that, and so we went into a different side, like completely approached it differently. I threw away my framework and I went and asked him, like, okay, what do you tell me a little bit about your life? I went towards his perception more so than what we were going to talk about around his identity. And his perception was very interesting. And as he started describing it, he looked at life a certain way. He was like very neutral about life. He was very, well, I'm going to die anyway. He was very accomplished and high achiever. He takes care of himself, but he had this perception that when I die, nothing's going to matter anyway. Why should I try anything? He wasn't saying that per se, but I could tell that was the background of his thinking. As we went into it, I'm like, have you considered having a different approach? What if you looked, we talked about death, like the whole conversation was about death. Like, what if there's a different possibility around death? Not even towards his beliefs and stuff. Like, let's explore that. As we explored that more and more, and I gave him some perspective on that, and I got him to think about it. It jogged a very different side of him. I'm like, so based on that, what do you feel your bigger vision could look like? If you did adapt something like that, if you did adapt a perception around death like that, and all of a sudden he goes in a completely different way, and his body language shifted, and he goes into excitement, from neutral to excitement. Like, okay, so let's make it more tangible. What would that look like in terms of your lifestyle? Let's start with your personal life. He's like, you know what? I think that means I need to travel 4 times a year, not once a year. And he can do it, by the way. He hasn't done it. He has the resources, he has the time, and he's already thinking about when he's going to do it. It's not even a question of how he's going to do it. And then we talked about the business side of things. He's like, you know what? I feel like I'm holding myself back. I feel like I can lead a lot of people in this direction, but I haven't been doing that. All of a sudden, his whole idea of life completely shifts. Now he's going in a completely different direction. I could not have predicted that in that session. I had to derail the whole thing, but that requires me to like be very attentive to the person's perception. And I wasn't trying to give him a belief or anything like that. He was very neutral about his life. And I checked in with him, like, is that how you want to be? He's like, no, I like being excited. I like having fun. I like being passionate about life, but I wasn't getting that from him. So before I go more into that, the point is that I think there are multiple levels of coaching. And as you work with people more and more, it stops being about challenges or even trauma or past challenges. It becomes about expansion. And I'd say really good coaching is about expanding somebody, at least to this far in my experience.
Yes. As you were talking, this is a totally random thought, but as you were talking, what occurred to me is a shift in approach with a client, particularly who's caught up on the technicality of the stress and anxiety economically or financially or whatever. But, rather than problem solving that, shifting it to, do they want to move more into being the kind of person that is not as thrown off by these sorts of things? So it's shifting the problem solving rather it's shifting their own development. Because a lot of, as Faisal said, we both work with a lot of high performers. Not everybody does. A high performer is simply, by Brendan Burchard's definition, is somebody who exceeds their peers in their productivity and the amount of stuff that they do, and they do it over long term. So it's not just like a quick crash and burn sort of thing. But if you're working with somebody who's got some big goals, they're really going to have to learn how to manage stress and how to be the kind of person that can take on more and bigger problems. Because as Faisal said, when you 10x something, you're 10xing your problems too. Problems don't get easier and smaller as you grow and develop. They get bigger and more complex. And so helping somebody become internally the kind of person that can weather this sort of thing may be kind of a way of refocusing.
Yeah, I would say this is one of those situations and it connects to our topic, is how would you get people to deal with fear? Well, part of it is that, so if he's really panicked, so if a client comes in, they are like, I could tell physiologically they're not able to handle it. And the way it's easily shows up, a client comes in, they're speaking really fast, they're not breathing. You could tell in their body language, they're very like tense, especially if you're doing it video, but even audio, you can tell in the tonality that they're not like, and if you've listened to people enough, you know that that's not their normal state. It's an exception to their normal state. And I would just stop them, and I wouldn't even talk about stuff. If they're in that state, because it doesn't matter what you talk about, they need to deal with that state, and they haven't given themselves the space. I will literally get them to close their eyes, work through that for a good 2 to 5 minutes. And then every time I've done this, like without exception, they will go to the other side. And the first thing that changes is their tonal shifts. Their tonality they speak much slower.
Yes.
They speak much slower. They feel much, and they will say, I'm calmer. It's like, I still have the stressors, but I'm much more calm. But now you're in a place where you can work through things. You can go towards plan. So the part of it is that you need to kind of help them with tools if they're not able to handle it, whether it's in that moment or if they're talking about their family or kids or team member, and they're like in complete rage mode. I would want them to deal with that part and take responsibility with that part first. And then the other side of the conversation, which is I think more coaching oriented, this is what I would say separates coaching from therapy very clearly, is that you get them in a very different state. Now we're not talking about right now. We're getting them a vision for a very different being that they could be. Yes. The possibility of something much greater. And they can see that in their mind, their ideal version, that better version of themselves. So if they can connect with that at an emotional and visual and at a linguistic level, they will take you with them there. The coaching part becomes easy because they want that. Most people want to live up to a better ideal for themselves. And everybody has a different, of course, it's subjective and it's contextual because everybody has a different version of what that looks like. So we can't judge what is big or small for somebody else. But to them, to their experience, when they can see the next level, they get excited about that. And ideally, that's what we want for our clients, is that's what we get paid for, to push them past their comfort area, push them past where they have convinced themselves to be, which we know that they are not. And by the way, that's a condition. As a coach, you need to believe that somebody's capable of more. If you don't, then you're not going to be able to coach them.
Yes. Well, we are approaching the end of our time today. Faisal, is there any last kind of thoughts that you wanted to throw out there about this economics, the stress and the working with clients in fear?
I would say, one, put yourself out there more, because your support is needed, your help is needed, because your normal thinking might be that people are not going to sign up because this, that, or the other, or they might have hesitations. But in reality, that's not what happens. It's actually, and businesses know this generally, just know how to leverage this thing. They tend to get better in their business, even in the downturns of the economy, because they know what to do with that. They know how to speak to their clients. Of course, be ethical in the process, connect with people that you can actually serve, that you can actually support, but talk to more people, because I guarantee you, you're going to get people who are worrying about a bunch of stuff. Not just it's not just a bigger economy, because it becomes real when it starts to show up in your life and people actually bring it in their own personal life. It's not like they talk about it conceptually. They come to their experience. It affects their relationship with people. It affects how they focus in their work. It affects how they think about themselves. It affects their confidence. It affects how they look at their future. Like these are very tangible things. And if you can get people to kind of step out of that, they have a solution and you have a product, you have a service. And so put yourself out there. This is the time.
Excellent. And as a coach, if you're having a hard time putting yourself out there, which a lot of coaches do, and you need a little swift kick in the butt or a little soft and friendly support, we actually are partnered with Coaching Mastery Community, which is a community of online coaches, or it's an online community of coaches. Not everybody works online. We have coaches all over the world that are a part of our community. We support each other in some pretty incredible ways. We have some programs or some opportunities every week where coaches focus on getting more clients. They focus on becoming a better coach. They focus on building a more sustainable business so that their coaching isn't just a side hustle that they're struggling with, but they're actually able to create it into a business that they want, whatever that may look like. For some people, it's a part-time business. For other people, it's a full-time business. For some people, it's doing, a lot more speaking rather than just a bunch of one-on-one. It doesn't really matter what it looks like. Our community has the capacity and the ability to help you stay motivated, to help you dial into your big vision, the same bit, similar to the way that you're trying to work with your clients and helping them understand their vision, to harness all their energy in that forward motion. So we would love to be able to work with you. coachingmasterycommunity.com. You can get details there. If you have questions on that, we would be happy to answer them.
Yeah, and especially right now, if you're listening to this March of 2023, but I'm sure we're around past that. And one of the things I would highlight is that it's a very critical moment, especially for businesses and people who are building businesses, especially with AI coming around more and more. And it's part of it is GPT-4 and ChatGPT, but there's so many AI systems that are coming around that are disrupting like the marketing industry. That is, you can create very, very interesting, beyond interesting things that blows your mind. Things that you could not do that in the past, that's coming around. So it's becoming easier for you to create content. It's becoming easier for you to promote yourself. But in the meantime, it's becoming harder and harder for coaches to have genuine conversations because people can't tell who is promoting anymore. It's the computers are promoting themselves. But when you go into an actual conversation, are you the coach that they were expecting? And that comes from you building your skill sets. That comes from you being part of a community that can give you feedback. That comes from you actually looking at what's currently happening in the business world to help you navigate it better. That's not going to come from a funnel that you buy. That's not going to come from a course you get. That's not going to come from some guru you listen to. It comes from like a live feedback process, which is one of the things we focus on. We give you consistent feedback in the community to help you move forward, whether it's on the skill set side or the business side, and help you develop that business and impact that you're looking for. So definitely reach out to go to coachingmasterycommunity.com or go to our Facebook page, search for Coaching Mastery Community. Join us because we do sessions regularly. In fact, we did a masterclass the other day on delivering sessions that sell to help you connect better with your clients. And at any point you're listening to this, please reach out to us because we have a lot of free trainings we can share with you that will help you move forward as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for giving us your time and attention. We expect that you are going to be a better coach for it. And we'll see you next week on the next podcast.
See you next week. Bye.
Bye.
You're listening to the Coach's Journey podcast.